For 23 years, I believed my father was the smartest businessman I would ever know. He built our pharmaceutical company from a tiny laboratory into a global empire worth more than $1.4 billion.
He taught my older brother Daniel everything about acquisitions.
Investors, manufacturing, and corporate strategy, and me. He handed me a mop. You're good with details. Dad told me, the morning he officially announced Daniel as his successor, the company needs people willing to do the work nobody else wants. I stared at him, thinking he was joking. He wasn't at the celebration that evening. Hundreds of employees filled the headquarters. Investors congratulated Daniel. Champagne flowed, cameras flashed. Dad stood beside my brother and announced, Daniel will lead the company into its next chapter. Everyone applauded. I stood in the back, wearing the gray uniform of the facilities department. Nobody knew that 3 floors below them, inside a secure office, was a document that could determine whether the entire empire was legally allowed to sell its most profitable products. And my name was on it years earlier. Before the company became a billion-dollar business, Dad had asked me to join the regulatory division. I wasn't interested in boardrooms. I loved science documentation and the complicated process of getting medicines approved. So while Daniel learned how to negotiate million-dollar deals, I spent 12-hour days studying regulations, conducting audits, preparing submissions, and communicating with federal regulators. Eventually, I became the company's chief regulatory specialist. Then came our biggest breakthrough, a revolutionary treatment that became the company's flagship product. I personally helped prepare the regulatory package. I coordinated inspections. I reviewed manufacturing standards. I corrected hundreds of compliance issues. And when the final authorization arrived, Dad hugged me and said, "You saved this company." I believed him, but success changed everything. Daniel wanted control. He wanted the CEO title, the private office, and the executive salary. Dad agreed. Then one afternoon, he called me into his office. Daniel needs people around him who understand their place. Dad said I didn't understand. You're moving to facilities. I laughed because I thought it was some cruel joke. I don't work in facilities. You do now. Why? Dad looked at me coldly. Because Daniel is my son. I stared at him. So am I. He didn't answer. That was the moment something inside me broke. I didn't resign. Instead, I accepted the janitor position. Everyone thought I had failed. Daniel openly mocked me whenever he passed me in the hallway. He would smile and say, "Keep those floors clean." Employees whispered behind my back. Some felt sorry for me, others laughed. But nobody knew what I was doing. After my shift, I was reviewing old regulatory records. Because there was one thing Dad had forgotten. The FDA authorization for our flagship drug wasn't simply attached to the corporation. The regulatory responsibility and authorization documents were tied to the original authorized regulatory representative and specific legal structures established during the company's early years. And that representative was me. I had never transferred those responsibilities. I had never signed the documents required to replace me. I had assumed Dad would eventually recognize my value. Instead, he treated me like someone disposable. So I waited. 6 months passed. Then Daniel made his first major mistake. He negotiated a massive international deal based on projections from the flagship drug. The deal was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Investors celebrated. The board approved it. Daniel appeared on business television and called himself the architect of the company's future. But behind the scenes, regulators requested updated documentation. The company's legal department discovered a problem. The authorization file didn't match the new corporate structure. A signature was missing. Mine. The lawyers called me into a conference room. Daniel was already there. He slammed a folder onto the table. "Sign it." I opened the folder. The documents would transfer regulatory responsibility to the new leadership. I looked at Daniel. "Why?" "Because you're holding up the company." "I've been holding up the company." He leaned toward me. "You're a janitor." I smiled. "And you're running a billion-dollar pharmaceutical company whose most important authorization still requires my signature." The room went silent for the first time. Daniel looked frightened. Dad entered minutes later. He didn't sit down, sign the papers. He ordered no. His face hardened. You're destroying your own family. I shook my head. You destroyed it. When you decided my brother's last name mattered more than my work. Dad reminded me that he had raised me, that he had given me opportunities, that everything belonged to him. I listened quietly. Then I placed a thick folder on the table. Inside were copies of regulatory submissions, correspondence inspection, reports, authorization documents, and internal emails. Every major milestone in the company's history had my fingerprints on it. I wasn't claiming ownership of the 1.4 billion company. I was showing them something more important. They had underestimated the person who understood how the company actually functioned. The board launched an internal investigation. What they discovered shocked everyone. Daniel had been approving manufacturing changes without proper regulatory review. He had ignored compliance warnings. He had pushed executives to accelerate production despite unresolved documentation problems. The company wasn't collapsing because of me. It was already standing on the edge because of him. Within weeks, the board removed Daniel from operational control. Dad was forced to step down as chairman. The international deal was renegotiated, and the company hired an independent compliance team to rebuild its regulatory department. As for me, I refused the CEO position. Instead, I accepted a seat on the board with one condition. No family member would ever again receive authority simply because of their last name. Months later, Dad came to my office. It was the first time in years he had visited me without giving an order. He looked older. I was wrong, he said. I didn't respond, he continued. I thought Daniel was the future in me. He lowered his eyes. I thought, you would always be there. That sentence hurt more than anything else because that was the truth. He didn't value me because he assumed I couldn't leave. I looked through the window at the headquarters, the same building where I had once pushed a cleaning cart through the halls, the same building where people had laughed at me. I finally understood something. Being underestimated can be painful, but sometimes it is also a strange kind of freedom. When everyone thinks you're powerless, they stop watching you, they stop listening. They stop realizing how much you know, and that's exactly what happened to me. My father gave my brother a $1.4 billion empire and made me a janitor. He thought he had reduced me to nothing. Instead, he accidentally placed me in the one position where I could see everything. And when the moment came, I didn't destroy the company. I saved it not because I wanted revenge. Because after 23 years, I finally wanted the company to become what my father once promised. It would be a place built on merit, responsibility, and integrity. Not family favoritism, and the greatest lesson I learned was simple. Never confuse someone's position with their power. Sometimes the person holding the mop knows exactly where the dirt is buried.